Hello, and welcome to eviCore Healthcare's educational webinar series. My name is Jonathan Murray, and I'm eviCore's Senior Vice President of Growth and Innovation for Seamless Solutions. eviCore is a company that empowers the improvement of care by connecting patients, providers, and health plans with intelligent, evidence-based solutions to enable better outcomes. If you would like to learn more about eviCore and how we enable better outcomes for patients, providers, and health plans, please email us at connect@evicore.com. Throughout 2020, eviCore will host free educational webinars that include guest speakers as well as eviCore subject matter experts to discuss today's most pressing healthcare topics. Stay tuned for our future webinars with new topics presented each month. We hope you will attend. We're excited to bring part 2 of our AI series with an in-depth discussion on how real-world advances in technologies such as connectivity and artificial intelligence are streamlining and facilitating the sometimes burdensome prior authorization processes providers must cope with. And now it is my privilege to introduce you to eviCore's experts, Dr. Sid Govindan, Product Development Director, and Danny Ortiz, Data Science Senior Supervisor. Before we begin, just a quick reminder to please submit your questions using the question option within WebEx. This presentation will be recorded and it will be available on demand located on the Insight page at evicore.com. Take it away, Sid and Danny.
Great, thank you, Jonathan, and thanks to the many people that have joined our webinar today. My name is Sid Govindan. Last month, Dr. Gracious touched on the why of prior authorization. Today, we're really going to focus on the what and how of our technological solutions to address some of the burdens and inefficiencies in the prior authorization process. And we're going to do that using the agenda I have here today. So first, we're going to jump right into artificial intelligence. We're going to speak to what are some of these buzzwords that we hear about? What are some daily life experiences that we have with artificial intelligence? And why might artificial intelligence be applicable to the inefficiencies of prior authorization? Then we're going to really go into prior authorization. We're going to speak to the problems that exist in the prior authorization workflow. And this is going to serve as a framework as we get to this third point, and we start to go into the utilization of our technologies, including AI, to address some of these major prior authorization problem areas. So I'm going to kick it over to Danny, who's going to go into artificial intelligence. Danny, to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sid. So we have a wide range of people on this webinar. So I'm going to step back for a second and first talk about what people actually mean when they say AI, and also kind of see if we can peek under the hood a little bit to understand functionally how AI actually works. So AI is one of those things where if you ask 10 different people what it means, you'll get essentially 10 completely different answers. But the way I really like to define it is pretty straightforward. It's just a machine that uses some sort of information to learn patterns. So what information is used, how the patterns are identified can really vary from business case to business case, but at the end of the day, it really just comes down to that, machines using information to learn patterns. Now, the actual application of AI can be really broad. You hear buzzwords like computer vision and machine learning and natural language processing, and all of these are really just branches within the kind of overarching web that is AI. And all these terms I just mentioned might sound kind of complicated or even futuristic, and admittedly, some of the math isn't necessarily simple, but the reality is what these algorithms are doing and how they're built can generally be broken down to essentially 4 simple steps. So first, you always start with collecting data, right? So healthcare companies in particular have data that is all over the place, right? You got claims information, billing information, EMR notes, readouts from DMEs like a CPAP machine, imaging files. You kind of get the gist. And for AI, it really all starts here. Getting that data from all these disparate sources into a central place and really processing it in a way that your machines can utilize it and and understand it. And so you'll see a lot of companies actually, because they're so interested in the business case and they're so interested in the sort of algorithms that they forget to really focus on the underlying data that supports everything. So once you got your data, second step is really to transform that data to something you think will be a good input for an algorithm. Engineers typically refer to this as feature engineering. That transformation can be something really simple, right? Like, what do you do when you have missing data? Or it can be something really involved, like working with a clinician to convert diagnosis codes into indicators of some sort of chronic condition for a patient. And once you have that data and it's centralized and transformed, then you can apply statistical techniques to kind of find patterns within the data. You know, you'll hear people use phrases like regression analysis, decision trees, neural networks. Really, when they say this, all they're talking about are these statistical techniques and algorithms that are used to extract these sort of patterns within the data. So finally, you know, once you have your data and you've built your algorithm, you can either indirectly use those insights to inform your decision making, or actually create production processes and pipelines that allow you to utilize those patterns in real time to kind of predict what would happen with new inputs to your algorithm. So it's kind of abstract. Let me try to take this from the abstract and those 4 steps into something a little bit more concrete. So default question I kind of get every holiday is, so what do you do again, and what does that mean? And from now on, I'll just make them watch this webinar. But in the past, the example I really like to give is Amazon and their recommendation search. So when you go into Amazon to buy shoes or toothpaste, whatever, at the bottom of the screen, you'll have a list of recommendations. The recommendations aren't arbitrary. They're not manually selected by some individual who's kind of guessing, you know, you looking at toothpaste, you also want mouthwash and floss. And while Amazon might be able to do that sort of individual selection for a few different items, the reality is the scale that they're at, it'd be practically sort of logistically impossible to do that individual selection. So getting under the hood, Amazon first really starts with data collection, right? So Amazon collects your ordering pattern, you know, what information you, what type of browser you're coming from. And they do that not just for you, but really all users that come into your system. Once that data is collected, then there's the next part we talked about, that transformation process, right? So they take that data, it's transformed into some input that's useful for a model. So maybe they take that info and start flagging things like, does this person only purchase items around the holiday? Does this person prefer a certain brand of something? Does this person you know, prefer a certain sports team? And then they take that, once they have that data process, they then compare all that user information with their historical users and run it through a trained algorithm to predict what other items you might want to purchase. And that's really that pattern recognition third step that we talked about. So finally, once you have that algorithm, you have all the data, when you're actually in your Amazon you know, browser and you see that recommendation for TVs or toothpaste, that's really the algorithm in action doing that last step of making the prediction. So a little later, we'll talk more about how AI is being applied to eviCore, but first I want to kick this back to Sid to talk through prior auth workflow and some of its associated problems.
Great, thank you, Denny. So before we go into some of the specific solutions and how they apply to prior authorization, it's critical to really understand some of the problems in the prior authorization process. One of the key tenets in product development is really focusing on the problem. There's a statement, fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And it's really to understand what are you actually trying to solve before you just go about applying technologies, including things like AI. So first, we're going to start with the problems. So prior authorization fundamentally begins here at step one, which is this doctor-patient encounter. And really, this is where a lot of critical thinking is undergone. And this is where a physician is learning about a patient, really assessing the patient, and starting to see, well, what would be the appropriate diagnostic test? What would be the appropriate procedure we need to do for this patient? At this point, typically an order is placed, and then that order gets scheduled. Now, upon the scheduling of that order is very often where some of the core prior authorization processes kick off. One of the first ones is a very important one, and this is related to case generation. Now, in this process of case generation, what's happening is some of the basic kind of rudimentary information, really about the patient, the provider, the payer, and the procedure. It's kind of the 4 Ps of information get filled out, and it's really the initial statement of saying, we're going to request prior authorization for this. Now, this step in itself can be a bit onerous. One is you have to actually manually enter in all this information. The second piece is that it can have errors associated with it, just because of the level of detail required to accurately fill out that case. So that is a source of some level of inefficiency there. Now, once the case is generated, the case then goes to what is a clinical survey. And this is an important step as part of a prior authorization process. And it's a step where certain clinical questionnaires and certain answers are provided by the provider's office. And this is useful because many cases can be approved in this manner. Now, the issue is that often the people filling out the clinical survey, which is typically a prior auth requester, are non-clinical. They've never seen the patient. They don't know what the patient came in with. And so inherently it's inefficient. This process requires this prior auth requester to go and look through the medical notes and try to determine some of the answers to those clinical questions that are being presented. And because of this kind of disconnect between the person answering the question and the person who might be more knowledgeable about the patient, there's certain kinds of inconsistencies that can come in the filling out of the clinical survey. There can be inaccuracies that come in this clinical survey, and so that can be a source of problems. This said, there are definitely a percentage of approvals that do occur at this point in the process. Now, for those cases that don't get approved at the level of the clinical survey, the next step, which is also an important step, is the providing of additional clinical information by the provider's office. And this is kind of that deeper clinical information to really explain what is the indication, what is the necessity for this procedure that gets sent along. Now, this process also has some problems associated with it. One is just the generation of that document from the EHR. It can be a manual effort, depending on the EHR, can be something of a bit of a challenge to actually generate that document. But more importantly, you still have a non-clinical person trying to make some decisions of which documents to attach to the case. And so that can be problematic. Now, when those documents do get sent over and get to the nurse has an important task, and this is now when the cases come over to the eviCore side. The nurse has this task, an important task, of starting to make an approval on some percentage of those cases based on this additional clinical information that has been received. And several approvals can occur at this point. Now, some issues do arise though. One is that inadequate information has been sent over. And this is problematic because now there's going to be a back and forth between the eviCore side clinician as well as the provider office clinician to make sure the adequate information is sent over. On the other side, too much information can sometimes be sent over. Sometimes nurses have documentation that's 100 pages long that they have to look through in order to properly process the case. And that itself can result in inefficiencies, it can result in increased turnaround times, etc. This said, some percentage of approvals do occur at this stage as well. Those cases that aren't approved at this stage will ultimately go to a physician. And the physician has the important role of saying, okay, with the information I have, I can make an approval on some percentage. Some of these cases I need to speak to the provider's office, something like a peer-to-peer, and have some back and forth there to see which of these cases should be approved. The physician also has the important task of declining or denying some percentage of cases as part of the checks and balances of some procedures that may be inappropriately ordered. But this back and forth itself can also create some inefficiencies. Now, when we talk about our solutions, both what we currently have and what we're developing, we have solutions across this whole stretch of the 1 through 6 step that I'm showing here. For the purposes of today, we're going to focus on steps 2 through 5. These are the steps for which we have the most widely deployed technology, and that's really going to be our focus for the webinar today. Hopefully this image, and we'll have it on each following slides, will serve as a mental framework as we start to lay out our solutions that you'll be able to hang them on and see how they're addressing the various parts of this process. So to go ahead into this step number 2, this case generation process, as we spoke about, this is the manual process of finding a lot of that kind of detailed information that I need to fill out as part of the case creation. So how do we address this? We address this with a direct connection to the EHR. So this is what we've worked on with our provider clients, as well as our relationships with the EHR. And we use standard formats of data coming in. This includes things like the 278 message, which comes in an encrypted form so it's safe and contains many of the data elements listed here, as well as actually several other data elements that are not listed here. But really what this allows us to do is it really allows us to address 2 major things. One is this manual step of having someone actually fill out this information can be addressed because we can do it in an automated way, computer to computer. So it kind of helps eliminate some of the errors that we would see. Secondly, and even more importantly, is this can occur in an automated fashion at a specific time in the workflow. Typically, we do this at the point of scheduling. And what this allows is consistent information to be received at a consistent time. And this then gives us the ability to pass this information off to our AI systems to start doing some processing. Because it's so consistent, it allows our AI systems to be more consistent in some of their processing as they start doing that prediction step that Danny was talking about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it off to Danny, who's going to talk about how information like this can be used in that step number 3 up at the top over here of how we can use this information to start using AI at the level of what was historically the clinical survey. So Danny, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sid. So staying on that sort of topic of the surveys and really reducing administrative burden, I'm going to talk a bit about how eviCore is using AI to simplify the prior auth survey process. But first, kind of a little history. Back in 2015, eviCore purchased a company based out of Boston called Cupid Health that really specialized in healthcare, natural language processing, and machine learning. And after the purchase, I started working with that group. One of the interesting things that I noticed when I started working with them was that they had a sort of culture that really questioned everything. There's never this, this is how it's always been done, this is how everybody does it, but instead they were always kind of asking, can we do this better, or should we be doing this at all? And so after the purchase, the Cupid group was tasked with really optimizing the prior auth workflow and simplifying the process for providers. And as we dug in, one of the sort of obvious choices was the clinical surveys. So for those who aren't familiar, these clinical surveys contain a series of questions pertaining to the patient's condition, and they're typically filled out by some administrative person that works at the provider's office. They're a source of sort of constant frustration from providers, really for 2 reasons. One, they're time consuming. So it typically takes 2 to 3 minutes per request that comes into our system to fill out the surveys. You can imagine if you have 10 plus requests a day that you're having to fill out, it can get really time consuming. And then the other aspect of it is that they're often viewed as confusing, because really the person who's submitting the information, again, is the administrative person and not actually the provider who's sitting there in front of the patient gathering that initial patient information. So in order to address this, we went and sat with some of the folks that actually are submitting these requests to get their perspective. And we took their feedback and decided, all right, let's build a new web survey, make it simplified. It had basically the same clinical criteria, but it was simplified with a modernized UI, a Google-like search for indication, kind of a changing of the questions to be more yes/no based. But even when we made all these changes, we were still finding the same basic complaints. Surveys were still confusing and they're still time consuming. So we regrouped and thought to ourselves, all right, we have these internally built algorithms. They've been iterated on for years and trained on our repository of over 140 million cases. And we know from our monitoring that they're fairly accurate predictors of medical necessity. So we said, all right, can we use these algorithms to actually replace these surveys altogether? And so that's what we did. And over the past few months, we've been rolling this out. We've been working with our health plan and provider partners. And to this point, I think we've had 500,000 cases that we've come through, and the results have been really exciting. So compared to our legacy survey process, these AI cases have seen a reduction in things like turnaround time, outreaches from eviCore to ask for additional information, reduction, because again, you're not having to go in and answer a survey, a reduction in the amount of time that admin folks are having to spend in either the portals, one of eviCore's portals, or on the phone speaking with an eviCore agent. The time savings we've found to be about 2 to 3 minutes per case. So if you extrapolate those 500,000 requests out at 2 to 3 minutes per case, you come to about 20,000 hours in administrative time that we've already been able to reduce, all while sort of maintaining that same clinical efficacy of our programs and helping to manage the growing costs within the U.S. healthcare system. So we've been really encouraged there. And, something I like to know is just, people ask me, why is AI right for the prior authorization space? And I really like to point them to those huge improvements in the provider administrative work as kind of clear examples why, because I really think the data speaks for itself. Okay, so now I'm going to pass the ball back to Sid to start discussing innovation on the document retrieval process.
Great, thank you, Danny. One of the key take-homes to what Danny was talking about is that percentage of cases that historically would get approved with the clinical survey, we are now able to do with artificial intelligence. And that is such a key critical step for us in really decreasing the inefficiencies of prior authorization. This said, there are still some of those cases that have not been approved. And this is because the information at that level was insufficient. And so how do we address that? And this is something that we are actively developing, but it's this ability to pull deeper information from the EHR. And so this is things like clinical notes, progress notes, diagnostic reports, medication reports, really that critical information that's clinical that allows us to actually do an assessment and a review of a case to really understand its appropriateness. Now, if you go and ask different hospitals or different prior auth requesters, what information would you pull and attach to a given case? And you go and do this at different hospitals and different people, and I've done this, you'll get different answers. Some people will say, we'll attach the last 3 office notes for a patient, and that's what we'll send along if additional information is required. Or we'll attach the last progress note, but all the imaging, or sometimes even all the notes from the last month. It's kind of variable. And so when we approach this in our innovation and our product development, the first step we took is really to say, well, why are we even attaching information to the case? And that really focused us to work with our reviewers, our clinicians at eviCore, to start to see what is the true minimal set of information that you need in order to make an adjudication on this case. And that information is vital for us to use to make sure that when we pull this documentation, and we do this with our deeper relationships with the EHR via APIs and other such ways to connect to the EHR, we're able to pull that information and ensure that it's the proper set of information. And what that does, it allows us to address 2 major inefficiencies. One is on the provider side of being able to select the right information to attach to the case. The second is on eviCore's side of having to deal with some of the inconsistencies historically of what gets attached. And so using this technology, we're really able to address both of those. Moreover, however, because this information is coming in a consistent way and electronically, we're able to provide that information further down the line, specifically to some of our AI systems, to be able to utilize that information more effectively as part of the adjudication process. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it off to Danny. He's going to speak to a bit of how clinical documentation and AI can be used to help make this process more efficient. So Dan, I'm going to pass it back to you for that.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sid. So like Sid mentioned, once eviCore retrieves these documents, we again can use AI to help facilitate the clinical review process. So more specifically, within the nurse review process, eviCore utilizes two forms of AI. So one is called natural language processing, and the other is optical character recognition. And generally, when people speak about them, you'll hear them refer to it as NLP and OCR. And again, like all things in AI, NLP and OCR sound fancy, but they're really pretty straightforward. In its simplest form, OCR is basically the process of converting either a handwritten or a typed document image into something a computer can actually use, like think of it like a Word document or maybe a searchable PDF. This gets the document to a point where we can actually do natural language processing on it. And now NLP, on the other hand, is really about, right, once we get that document in a sort of Word-like form, how do we get actionable information out of that so that either algorithms or humans can understand and use that information? So as an example, we might get a clinical note, might be several pages, and there might be a line in there that says, patient has no family history of B cancer. And when we get that note, we can use NLP to tag something that might say history breast cancer is negative. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of complexities with NLP. So take the sentence I mentioned earlier. Patient has no family history of B cancer. So the B cancer, does that mean breast cancer? Does that mean brain cancer? You really need context to know. Can you identify that this is talking about the patient's family and not the patient themselves? Can you identify the fact that we said not indicates the negation of this entire statement? And also, we know sometimes there's just transcription errors, even within EMRs, because the reality is doctors are some of the busiest people out there. And, sometimes things get misput into the EMR or, just written down incorrectly. But in spite of all these problems, two things really work to our advantage. So first, NLP techniques continue to improve at a fairly rapid pace. And secondly, and I'd argue even more importantly, as eviCore begins connecting directly to EMRs, like Sid was mentioning, the quantity and quality of data also expands exponentially. So all those extra data points really expand our ability to leverage AI, and it really helps us understand these sort of subtleties within the data itself. Okay, and I will pass it back to Sid to kind of tie the whole workflow back together.
Great, thank you, Danny. So we started here, and what we really want to summarize with is what does this mean for a given provider when we talk about all of these technologies? So we started with this 6-step process by which prior authorization is done. With the application of the technologies that we've spoken about, and this includes the EHR connectivity, as well as the artificial intelligence, we've been able to do this. And this is live production software across multiple provider sites and across multiple payers. And basically what this says is, after a procedure gets ordered and scheduled, automatically, within seconds, we get an approval for a significant percentage of those procedures. And for example, in the realm of advanced imaging, this is at a given provider site, typically 50+% of their cases get approved within seconds because of these processes, because of the overlaying of artificial intelligence to help with these processes. Now, an important point here is that when we're talking about this in this decreased time, specifically we're talking about the approval. So we're not saying, in seconds a case gets denied. But really what we're doing is we're acknowledging the fact that a lot of the procedures and the tests that get ordered are actually appropriate. What we're trying to do is to utilize our technology to really expedite the processing of those cases which we know should be approved, so that we can focus on some of the other cases. And that's really where appropriateness and other things are important to consider. So I hope you enjoyed kind of our run through of some of the AI and some of the technologies that we've applied. Like I mentioned, we have technologies and are developing technologies at some of these other aspects, including, steps 1 and step 6 that we have shown here. And hope that you continue to stay, engaged with some of what we're presenting and some of our mindset as we approach innovation, especially in the realm of prior authorization. There's a lot more to come, and really appreciate your time today. I know we're pretty much at the end of our presentation time. I think we have a little time to do some questions. And so I know Jonathan has been looking at some of the questions that are being posed. And so I'm going to pass it over to him to see if there are questions that we can start to address at this time. Jonathan, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Sid and Danny, for your insightful presentation. We will now begin the question and answer section of our webinar. So let's see. We've got some questions. First question, is this AI only available when eviCore connects to the EHR?
Yeah, hey, Jonathan, I can take that one. So good question, and short answer is that no, it's not just when we're connected to the EMR. So more recently, really, we've been able to actually leverage this AI technology within basically any contact method that you would normally reach out to eviCore with. So, the big ones are via one of our web portals or over the phone, and then also, yes, via the EMR connected path as well.
Great. A couple questions basically asking the same question. Is AI technology currently live?
Sure. So I can take that one as well. Yeah. So we do have this live. We have eviCore has basically always had some form of AI technology, and really we're just expanding this out. And primarily, though, I should note this is only within our radiology and cardiology business at this point in time, although we are evaluating others.
Great, thanks, Danny. What percentage of advanced imaging cases will AI address?
Danny, I can take that one. I kind of mentioned this on the last slide, but there's different ways in which the AI is applied. So in the realm of touchless approvals, these are cases that the moment they get scheduled, they get put through our software, our processes to adjudicate them. And this is when we do have a connection with the EHR. The AI sees all of those cases and approximately 50+%. So depending on the payer mix at a given provider site, that's kind of the realm we're talking about. So 50+% of cases, the AI will say, this is a case that should be approved. And so that is kind of the percentage from that perspective. Now, of that other slightly less than 50% of cases that we're talking about, AI is still used in those cases as well. And it's used in some of the ways that Danny was alluding to regarding, when there's documentation, et cetera. And it's used to various kinds of percentages of that other half of cases as well. So more and more, as we continue to innovate and we continue to see what are the ways in which we can use AI, we're really trying to increase the percentage of cases in that other half for which we use AI to really expedite the process.
Great, thanks, Sid. Another question came in. What is the process, and I'm paraphrasing here, what does the process look like when you're connected to EpicEHR?
Yeah, I can take this one. So with EpicEHR, so there's a few forms of connection with the EHR, and I'll talk to them at high level. So there's some data, that we get, and I'm assuming the question is asking a little technically about how we actually connect to the EHR, so I'll answer it in that way. So hopefully that's correct. So there's some connections that we get via standard kind of protocols that have existed for a while. 278 is a great example. It's a standard format of a message, and it's formatted in a special way that can get sent over. And that kind of connection we establish with various provider clients. There's a little work on the provider side and work on our side to kind of set up that connection. And that allows us to essentially get certain data elements. So that's one form of connection. The other connection is really using APIs. And so there's things like Fire APIs, et cetera, that we also use as part of Epic connections in order to pull other types of data that doesn't come in kind of this older 278 format. And so that's another form of connection. I'll also say, and something that I didn't mention before, is that when we generate these approvals within our system, we also write back that approval information directly to the EHR. And so it's really an end-to-end process. That less than 20 seconds is an end-to-end process where like greater than 50% of cases literally disappears. And that is another form of connection that is used to write back. It's very similar to the 278 connection, but has some technical things behind it because of security. So various kinds of different kinds of security that needs to be involved in the write back. So that in short is kind of the three major types of connections that we use with an Epic system.
Great, thanks, Sid. I think I'll add on to that because I think they were asking a little bit about the process, and so help me out here.
Sure.
But I think the process is also that there's a triggering event within Epic. So that could be at the point of order or at the point of scheduling, like within Cadence. And then Epic will have some logic internally that will look at the CPT code and the health plan, and then package up all of that patient information and electronically, behind the scenes, send it over to eviCore. Once it hits eviCore, we run it through these algorithms, and for that subset that get approved, as Sid mentioned, that we would send back that authorization information that would go back into Epic. Obviously, the provider would decide, where it goes back into Epic. Does it go into the authorization record, into the referral record, Cadence? But basically, that's how it becomes this touchless round trip process. So, a great question. Another question, how do you ensure clinical accuracy of the AI process?
Yeah, I can take that one. So first off, good question. This was actually one of the first questions that we had internally when we were building out these algorithms, because we didn't want to just kind of hand the keys of the kingdom over to the AI without some oversight. The decision we ended up coming to was to build out an auditing mechanism. So the audits are essentially independent of our actual model decisions, and essentially some percentage of volume that flows to the algorithm that might have been approved, we then actually send it on to a clinician at eviCore to additionally review. And it really helps us in two ways. One, provides that feedback for us that, all right, these algorithms are working correctly, or maybe we need to train an algorithm somewhere. But the other aspect of it too is that it kind of creates this sort of perpetual feedback loop where we get more data that comes in, and we can continually use that to improve and iterate upon our algorithms altogether.
Great. Thanks, Danny. How often do we update the AI algorithm?
Yeah, another good question. So it really varies by model, but usually every algorithm, and we have many of them, but every algorithm we update at least a few times a year, especially if there's any sort of clinical content changes in the criteria, we'll update it then. But it's something that it's not a model that is, some companies will have models that are perpetually retraining and redeploying. Us, we like to kind of take a measured approach, make sure the model is working correctly, and test it and sort of stress test it before we actually promote anything into our production systems. Great.
Thanks, Danny. Quick question: how do we ensure we are pulling the correct documents for clinical review?
Got it. I can take that one. I believe this is in that part where for that additional clinical information, how do we know we're pulling the correct documents? So as I mentioned, this is something that we are actively developing. And really the way that we do it is and a lot of our product development approach, and that honestly is a whole other webinar, is really experimental, it's really scientific in terms of our approach. So the way that we approach it is we first ask, well, what is actually needed to make this adjudication? And that's really working closely with our clinical reviewers. And that's a metric that we track. We track, if we make this adjustment to what gets sent over, how does that affect the percentage of cases that could ultimately be adjudicated? And we do this obviously, not in production, we do this in simulations to start to learn and start to see, well, which progress notes turn out to be the most useful? What information in the note that I pull indicates that it's highly likely to be useful ultimately as part of the attachment? And so we try out many of these possibilities and then start to measure, which of them results in the highest success rate ultimately. And so that's how we do it. We do a lot of this experimentation on older cases, retrospectively looking back and seeing, what changes we can make and do that, and then slowly move things out into production in a very measured way. Typically on a very small fraction of cases first, ensuring that everything's working okay, and then as soon as we've proven that there's some value, starting to increase the volume of cases that flow through in that way.
Great. Thanks, Sid. Another question comes in just for clarification is if we're doing this for pharmacy requests. Do you want to touch on what programs this is currently supporting for eviCore?
Yeah, I can take that. So right now for eviCore, this is just being done within our radiology and cardiology business, particularly within advanced imaging. So I think I mentioned this earlier, but we are evaluating it within other areas of prior authorization, but nothing has actually been deployed into production yet.
Okay, some other questions were coming in for non-EpicEHR systems. So how we work with non-EpicEHR systems. I think I'll just answer that pretty quickly that, as Sid mentioned, we're using the industry standard transaction sets like the EDI X12278, so we'll take that in. Also working with APIs, so whether it's a EHR specific API like the EpicEHR Orchard or the evolving DaVinci or other EHR APIs. So we're working with different EHRs, and obviously we can connect to them again, whether it's the 278 or a standard API. Let me take a look at some other questions. So one question is, if the physician places an order, what would the workflow look like for that physician? So do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I can take that one. So right now, in terms of what we spoke about today, specifically, once that order is placed from the physician standpoint, that order has been placed, and then typically that order gets scheduled. And the moment that order gets scheduled is when a lot of these processes that I spoke about take place. This said, as I briefly mentioned at the end, in terms of how we work at the point of physician ordering, and even how we work at the end of the whole process are things that we are actively looking into and developing to further innovate within prior authorization.
Great, thanks, Ed. So this concludes the QA portion of our webinar. This webinar was recorded and will be available on demand by visiting eviCore.com. Please remember to register for our upcoming webinars. You will receive an email invitation with the opportunity to do so. Thank you again, Sid and Danny, for sharing your expert knowledge with us today. Thank you all for your attendance and your insightful questions. This concludes our webinar. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.